I'd like to welcome you all. This is the second in a series of calls that we're hosting on coronavirus, climate crisis, and living in a VUCA world. We'll talk about VUCA a little bit later on. I'm Gil Friend. I'm CEO of Natural Logic. I'm your host today. My co-host is Gene Dunaway, coming to us from Arkansas. And just to get a sense of who's here, we're going to throw up a couple of quick polling questions. Gene, can you do that or do I do that? Okay, there you go. How would you characterize your mood in this moment? If you're on the first call, you know that mood is something that we've talked about and we'll be talking about again in the course of these conversations. You may find yourself in many moods. Choose the one that feels most present or strongest to you.
Thank you, everyone. We have about half the people have voted. If anyone else would like to vote, please do so. We'll hold this open for another minute.
If for some reason you can't see the poll, just add in the chat. How would you characterize your current mood? 1 or 2 words.
Okay, we've had about 60% of the people vote, and it seems to have stopped there. So I'm going to end the poll now. And then I'm going to share the results with everyone.
So can you see that on your screen?
Yes.
I have muted everyone, but anyone can unmute yourself.
Some of the comments in the chat, well, you can see them there. Very hopeful, honored, and calm. Calm terror. So we're a reflection of the world around us. We're living in many different moods individually, mind change throughout the day. And as a society and culture, many different ones as well. Gene, can we get the next question? Oh, you know what the deal is? It's up at the top. Oh no, that's
okay. I think people answered all 3 of them.
Well, they did. Okay, so there. Okay, so if you scroll down.
So I'm share the results, and you should be able to look down the poll and see them all.
So you can scroll that. So geographically, mostly U.S., a little bit from Asia and Africa and Europe. Welcome people from far away. And we asked, where do you situate your work or identify yourself? A little bit of large business, a bit of small business, a lot of self-employed, a lot of other. We'll find out. If you care to say what other is for you, put that in the chat as well. Okay. All right, so let's move on from the poll. Thank you. Get a sense of who's in the room with us. We're going to try to provide opportunities for you to speak, but obviously with this many people on the call, not everyone's going to get a chance to do that. So again, by way of introduction, I'm Gil Friend. I'm CEO of Natural Logic, a strategy boutique that works with companies to identify the opportunities that appear when you put sustainability and living systems at the heart of your business. to drive innovation and service and the usual business metrics. Formerly, recently completed a stint of 5 years as the first Chief Sustainability Officer for the city of Palo Alto. And like all of you, I've been thinking a lot, pondering a lot, the remarkable moment that we find ourselves in. So I've invited you all to join me in an experiment, a different kind of conversation in a very different moment that is at the same time both poignant and ironic. I mean, the poignancy is clear. We're at enormous risk. There's suffering at a very visible scale around the planet that has appeared very suddenly. This is not a slow-moving crisis, which is hard for humans to perceive. It's a fast-moving crisis. And it's ironic because while we're largely obsessed with the problem, and certainly our news media are, both the circumstance itself, the fear around it, the breakdowns that have brought us to this point, we're also witnessing a remarkable moment in the history of human solidarity and cooperation. We are collaborating at scale around the planet with high speed, with enormous effectiveness, very different in different places. You know, the contrast between the United States and China, between Singapore and New York and Florida, for that matter, is vast, but happening in the hands of hundreds of thousands of extremely courageous people. We see that we can get on top of this thing. We see that there are ways to address this crisis with focused, rapid, effective action. And so we're living in both of those worlds at the same time. It's a study of contrasts, and it's a study in the profound uncertainty of our lives on this planet, something that we're very confronted with now, but is really there for us all the time. To my eyes, we're in an unprecedented historic moment, brought about by both of these, by the risks of a cascading and uncontrolled pandemic and the kind of human suffering that it could bring, and the kind of social destabilizing that it can bring. And we're also in a moment where, not just through the medical and public health collaboration, but because the game is broken. Everything is topsy-turvy. Trust has shattered across all sorts of institutions. No matter what anyone tells you about what will happen tomorrow or next week or the month after, none of us knows. And that extends beyond the response to the pandemic to the political and economic and cultural situation we find ourselves in. You know, we're in a planet devoid of leadership. The 50 or so years where the United States was looked at as the global leader, you know, either happily or resentfully, but accepted as a fact, is over. China has aspirations, but they're not there yet. Europe is surprisingly quiet in the midst of this crisis. India appears to be a mess. Where do people turn for leadership? Who has both the trust and the power and the authority and the capability of setting an agenda at a planetary scale? We see emergence of what looks like competent and focused leadership at local scale, cities and states and provinces around the world. But it's a very different game than what we've lived most of our lives in, all of us. What comes next is not clear. And to me, that's an enormous opportunity for each of us in our various ways to contribute to what is emerging. So we're in a very potentially powerful situation because we're doing something we never intended to do. We are stress testing systems at a planetary scale. And those of you who do engineering or do process design, or even who do medical work, you know that there is a way to stress a system that discloses how the system is working and discloses its breakdowns, discloses its weak points, discloses its strengths. And so here we are. We have an opportunity to live in a laboratory. We didn't choose this opportunity, but we have the opportunity to live in a laboratory where a stress test is underway. What can we learn from that? What can we discern? What kind of points of opportunity, leverage points, can we identify based on a better diagnosis of what's wrong that can help guide us to the actions we should take in the future? You know, we have all of us, I suspect, on this call to varying degrees have had a sense that something is wrong at many scales in the life we're living on this planet. We know also that we're not alone in that. We see the malaise, the distrust, the gathering force of populist movements in many countries. People smarter than I have observed that these are the rise of populism as we're seeing it now. The right-wing populism is a reflection of this discontent. It's a reflection of people who are unhappy with the lives they're living, with the hand that they feel that they've been dealt, with the prospects they see before them, and they're reaching for some kind of answer. Alain Touraine, the French social philosopher, just recently did an interview. I'll see if I can get the link out to you after the call. Profound interview about the current moment. He speaks very eloquently in this notion of sense making in the world being broken. Chauncey Bell, I see you there. You were on the call this morning that I was listening in on. Could you briefly summarize what Touraine said? You can unmute yourself.
I can unmute myself, but briefly summarize what he said. No, I can't.
Okay.
It's, if you want, Gil, I can put it on the screen, but that's kind of lengthy.
It's too long. Well, maybe, I think the first page though is striking, isn't it?
Well, I'll tell you what, I'll put it on the screen in 1 second here and you can see it. I need to.
Well, you know, the question is, how do we make sense of this moment when all of our usual handholds, the ground we're used to standing on, is shifted or gone? When the stories are gone or confused, when people speak with stunning certainty about what they think is going to happen next as if it's true, when we know it's just a possibility among many other possibilities. So the challenge that I find myself living in is twofold. One is, how do I live at some kind of peace in the middle of this instability? Because if I'm stressed all the time, I'm of no use to anybody, least of all myself. But how do we find calm in the face of this uncertainty? And second is, how do we learn to observe effectively, anticipate, we're in a time where we're not going to be able to predict anything. But how do we anticipate the possibilities that are before us and start to navigate this landscape of uncertainty that I assert will be a feature of our lives for our whole lives. This is, you know, this is the rest of our lives is going to be like this, not necessarily COVID, but some kind of mess and disorder and instability and groping for what the new story is. Chauncey, having luck with that or not?
Yeah, no, I can't put it up. I can probably send it to, put it into the chat box, the text. It's quite short. It's two and a half pages kind of thing, but that's about the best I can do right now.
Let me share something with you on screen. Where'd it go? Okay. What do you see? Just raise your hand if you want to comment, and Jean will. Actually, for this, it'd probably be easier. Just turn your mute off, say a couple of words, and go back on mute. What do you see? What is this a picture of?
Well, this is Shel Horowitz in Hadley, Mass. I see an exponential curve, a flattening curve, and a slightly less flattening curve.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Somebody else?
Actually, three numbers at different stages.
Let's use hand raising, and Jean, just work fast to unmute people. Otherwise, we're going to have a bit of chaos here. Great. Maybe you want to talk.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Can you hear me?
Yes, go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, we've lived with S curves, which have an exponential function since the dawn of evolution. So the problem is that the exponential curve itself is a function of so many underlying forces and factors that people get obsessed with the numbers without understanding the dynamics behind it. I think we're seeing a lot of that today. It's good that people are getting to know what an exponential curve is, but there's a whole history of that curve that's missing right now. And I think that's a really important learning point for us locally.
That's where we're going, Robin. We'll come back then just a moment. Anybody else identify this? Have you seen this chart? Where have you seen it? Any hands up, Gene?
Yes, I'm going to call on Ian.
Okay. Who's next?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yeah, go ahead.
I see just simple maths, so the physics and biology, the way the world actually works, just simplified really down to the essence. And as I say, it covers biological and physical systems.
And economic systems.
Yeah, yeah.
So I would say the way the worlds work, not the way the world works. There ain't one world here. There's a couple of different things going on. One more, please. Who's next, Gene?
Eckhart.
Eckhart. What do you see? Where have you seen this chart?
Hi, Gil. I think it reminds me of a book that I read maybe a decade and a half ago by Donella Meadows, and it's looking at scenario analysis for futures, what we could conceivably get at. And I think the lower of the extremes is taking corrective action in the most conservative and yet doable manner. Well, not necessarily the easiest, but doable. And then the red is a little bit less than ideal. And then the black is the inevitable if we just continue to go off the cliff, which I don't like to think about.
Thank you.
Respect to climate or any other metric you want to use.
So no one has said, but where I've seen this is in the COVID rates.
Okay.
And the COVID mortality rates. I've seen this chart again and again. And the degree of turning down of the red or the green has to do with the actions taken by a particular jurisdiction, how much they've done to lock down, how quickly they've done it. The green is what happens when you lock down sooner than the red. The black is what happens when you dither and delay about taking action. We've seen this, okay? And we've seen the same chart around greenhouse gas rise in the atmosphere and temperature rise on the planet Earth. It's exactly the same chart. You see a runaway option, and you see an option to bring that growth down within some kind of limits, sensitive to what measures you take and how quickly you take them. And you see there's a flexion point right down in the middle of the bottom of the chart where these three curves diverge. Think of that at the point of intervention, when shelter-in-place orders are instituted, when lockdown is instituted. If it's sooner, the curves flatten sooner. If it's later, the curves flatten later. And we've seen it in other realms as well. The funny thing about this is that I said there's different worlds at play here. A couple of you said, well, Robin said that the S curve, or called the sigmoid, is a standard population biology curve. It's what we see throughout living systems. An organism gets started with a resource base, it eats, it grows, it reproduces. The reproduction is exponential because it's a percentage of the prior quantity. Each unit of time, the prior quantity is bigger, and so it's a percentage of quantity. And it flattens out because of natural limits and constraints that are there in the environment. Running out of food, population growing so large that predators can easily pick it off. The growth is never in the physical capacity of living systems. The respiratory friction in the lungs of insects mean that you can never see ants as big as they were in the 1950s sci-fi movies. The physics just don't allow it. So there are constraints in living systems that produce a sigmoid, an S curve that grows very fast and then flattens out. The black curve is the compound interest curve, isn't it? It's the economic growth curve. It's the growth without constraints. Because you just, you put your money in the bank and you get interest and you keep it there and you get more interest and more interest. And it looks like that if you're willing to ride out the market ups and downs and just see the thing grow, at least in theory. But these worlds are different, but they're the same. The economic world, the homo economicus, we as living beings live in a living world. We pretend that there are no constraints, but we have them. And we see that in a very stark way now with the coronavirus. Any comments?
Harvey Stone?
Yeah, I think that's absolutely right. And it leaves me feeling what I generally feel anyway, which is alternating and rotating real despair about this and real hope about this. And I can see it going either way, and obviously something in the middle there. But I certainly don't think it's determined one way or the other.
Well, it's not. It's not. I mean, we're in a historical moment. We're at this flexion point in terms of pandemic and climate and global economy and a host of other factors. And it's going to go one way or the other, and we don't know which it is. One of the questions is, what agency do we have in that moment? Harvey, let me ask you, when you can be in despair, you can be in hope. You're in fact in both of them, I'm speculating. We're all in both of them some of the time. Yes. How do you live your life in both of those moods at the same time? You personally.
I focus much more on the hope part. I mean, for a number of years now, and I've accelerated, and it's going to be a project that I'm launching soon. I've been collecting positive stories of progress, stories of momentum that clearly indicate in many issues we're way beyond square one. We're much further down the line than hardly ever gets talked about, certainly in the mainstream media. And so that helps me. When I every day look for these stories and catalog these stories, it really helps.
Something I found true throughout my career, that motivating people around the problem only goes so far. But being able to offer up real solutions on the ground that not only could work, but actually have worked. And I'm looking around the gallery, and I see a lot of you have done that same kind of work of identifying and lifting up positive examples, because as Kenneth Boulding said years ago, existence is proof of the possible. You can say all you want, it can't be done. And all of us have heard that many times from our colleagues and our friends. But as soon as we can point to a place where it has been done, that argument doesn't hold anymore. Look, people said 2 months ago that it's impossible to turn the global economy in any amount of time, much less in a month. And here we're in a different economy in a matter of months or weeks or days. People have said, you can't possibly pay for change X, Y, or Z. You can't pay for that policy. And here we are, governments around the world are somehow finding ways to pay for what we're doing now. John Pfluger, I see you, someone who lives in the corporate world. I'm sure you've heard from your colleagues, we can't afford that sustainability program.
Actually, no, not yet. Well, not in the local sense of the last couple of weeks.
No, not in the last couple of weeks. But I mean, if you think about your work in corporate sustainability over the past couple of decades, I'm willing to wager real money that you've had people say, we can't afford that, that's a luxury.
Yeah.
And we've had to patiently explain that, no, it's actually a good investment with a good rate of return, which goes so far, but being able to point to the example of how it's a situation. So here we have an example of an economy transforming rapidly, and an example of being able to find a way to pay for something that seemed impossible just a short time ago. So to my mind, that opens possibilities for us here in a bunch of different domains. We need to, what happens if we can change the conversations that we're having? We, in this small group, each of us in our lives, our families, our communities, our workplaces, there's this interesting interplay between the conversations you have and the moods that you live in. They each affect each other. If we can shift our conversations and our moods, if we can shift the actions that we take, if we can shift the policies that we're living in, and maybe if we're lucky, actually shift the capital flows of this planet. Now, all of these things are happening already. Many of you were involved in them. But the provocation that I raised in the first essay that brought us all together is, while most of the world is focusing on survival in response to a pandemic, what would happen if a small hardy band of people focused hard on that question, how do we drive those shifts in ourselves and the worlds that we interact in to feed that transformation, to nourish those shifts, to cultivate in ourselves and in our organizations the capacity to orient to and navigate an uncertain landscape, and do it with grace and calm and power. Comments from you all.
So Howard Perlmutter is next. I'll unmute you, Howard. I also notice people who have your mics on, but I can't tell whether you want to raise your hand. Would you please go to participants and on the bottom, click raise your hand so I'll know you want to share. So Howard.
We have 100 people on the call, so we need to try to navigate this conversation, give as many of you time to speak as possible, and do it orderly. So Howard and everybody else, please keep your comments focused and brief. So,
I'm honored to be in a congregation of Buckminster Fuller's virtual children and grandchildren here. And we're looking at how do we synergize and practice comprehensive anticipatory design science and create a world that works for everybody here. And it's great that we're actually entering into a calm context here because the world is coming to where we're at. And we're finding that the failure of top-down institutional leadership is providing a gigantic opening of possibility. So this emergency is leading to an emergent possibility. A lot of us here have been working from home. A lot of you have been involved in the birth of technologies. And what we're discovering is that this COVID crisis is leading to a mathematics lesson, a crash course for 7.5 billion people in cybernetics. The graphs, Gil, that you were just showing, it really can be boiled down very simply. In cybernetics, you have two fundamental behaviors, negative feedback and positive feedback. And unconstrained positive feedback gives you the exponential curve. And negative feedback gives you damped oscillation down to a homeostasis. And the combination of positive and negative feedback gives us, for example, the logistic curve, when the positive feedback is dominant at the beginning and negative feedback is dominant as we go on. And what we're looking for is how can we combine positive feedback in the things where that's deserved and negative feedback where that's deserved. How can we be good cyberneticists, in other words, steersmen of the ship. The cybernetics is about steering the ship. And so, what you're actually talking about is how can we use the new communication mechanisms. I mean, basically what this COVID's doing is it's catalyzing the shift from a transportation-centric economy to a communication-centric economy. And 2020 is the tipping point and that's something that's been held back for a long time. So we have this huge opening right now as we shift from a transportation-centric to communication-centric, from a fossil-based economy to a post-fossil economy. And those of us who are here are the leaders of doing that.
Let me interrupt and suggest that we be careful there. Because I would say this is not what COVID is doing. This is what COVID might be doing, or what might be happening in response to this pandemic. There is no, there's no machinery that's driving this change. There's no guarantee of where it goes. It could go very well, it could go very badly.
Oh, it's just an opening. It's an opening. It's a possibility, right?
Yeah, and I want to invite us to think about it that way, as openings and possibilities rather than as predictions. Look, you talk about the transition from fossil fuel economy to renewable economy, but one of the things we're seeing, certainly in the United States, is an attempt by our government to double down on subsidies to the fossil fuel industry, to protect the ancient rather than to support the new. So this is an economic issue because it's defying economic fundamentals. It's a political issue because all of the conversation that we're having here today, rarely do I hear people talk about it in these terms, but all these conversations are conversations about power. And power's a bad word for a lot of us. I know for me, I just had a new encounter with the notion in the last month or two. I've realized that I've lived most of my adult life thinking that power is bad. because I've hated the way that I've seen power applied in the world that I'm living in. But in fact, power is inevitable. Power is a given. Power is just part of the physics of the world. There's Michael Mann, not the climate Michael Mann, but another talks about political power, economic power, social power, and ideological power. We all share in those to varying degrees. We lack those to varying degrees. That's a conversation we need to think about, because we don't get to where we want to go just by complaining about how bad those other guys are, including the president that we elected. And you might say to me, well, I didn't elect him, I voted against him, but we as a collectivity participated in a political process and we didn't get the outcome we wanted. We're participants in that process. We failed at our own exercise, our own power. And we need to look at that very starkly and include that not just in warm and intellectually stimulating conversations that we have among each other, but how do we exercise our power, as many of you, I'm seeing faces on the screen, I know have. But that's part of the same. Gene, who's next here?
Next is Stan Curtis, and you are unmuted, Stan.
Oh, thank you. Well, I love that curve. I agree with Ian. It's used to characterize a lot. I think of it as the learning curve. Mm-hmm. And then I think in the Anthropocene era, I think, the human factors of learning are really dominating. Our behaviors are dominating every issue, and the COVID virus really shows how quickly our behaviors can change and the scale of that curve. But I actually see a family of curves. So our learning curves are different for different behaviors. And there's actually a challenge of balancing the learning curves around, say, technology with the learning curves around, let's say, policy. So we have created a policymaker's dilemma, sort of like Clayton Christensen's innovator's dilemma. The curves crossing, depending on how fast we're learning and how fast our behaviors change, are so key. And then instead of looking for the limits to growth, like a lot of people have done, I think the key to the curves is more the spanning factor at each node. So go back down to the bottom of the curve and see if you give it to 2 people or 3 people, or if the branching factor is 5 people. And going from 2 to 3 to 4 to 5 at the branching factor to create the network effect is the real deal. It starts at home. And I think especially in the loneliness epidemic and in the public health crisis, the lesson learned from public health is it's about trust. You have to trust to stay at home. You have to encourage people to cluster in the right branching factors. And so I think, Dunbar really gave a version of that curve. There's a mathematical exponent set equation, the Dunbar sequence, 5, 15, 50, 150. And I think those trust clusters that neurologically we tend to pattern are broken at the small end of the scale. We each have to be able to help ourselves and our nearest cluster. And then that cluster enables the next cluster.
We're seeing a breakdown of trust in this present moment. Politically characterized in this country by red states who are less likely to be in action around pandemic control because of lack of trust in intellectuals, lack of trust in science, some kind of certainty that they know what's going on. And to the question of public health, this is stark for me, and I think this is one of the opportunities opened up now, is the realization that personal health doesn't exist without public health. I can't be healthy if my neighbors are not in this situation. I can't be healthy if the homeless people in Berkeley are uncared for. How can I be healthy in a country where, 20 or 30 million people don't have access to health care? So
I think it's really fun to talk about the big issues, but I don't think we should start with red and blue. I think we should start with hungry or not hungry. And my friends in the red states are hungry and can't, enable the food to get to the cities. And my friends in the blue cities that have a lot of jobs, 20% of the kids in Portland are starving. We have plenty of money. So I think if we were enabling the lowest level of public health and were able to do the lowest level of trusting, we would be able to scale further, and it wouldn't start at red, blue, or Chinese US.
Well, let's come back. We'll talk more about trust, if not today, in the next call. The point I wanted to make about the public health is that one of the openings I see here with the pandemic is the possibility of a new conversation about universal health care. It doesn't have to be Medicare for all. It doesn't have to be Obamacare. It doesn't have to be any particular formula. But the notion of the need for universal public health, because none of us has health without it, is an example of a new kind of opening that this moment gives us. Looks like Sandra is next.
You're unmuted, Sandra.
Great, thank you so much. Gail, I love the blog that you wrote, and I feel like I'm completely aligned with the ideas of it. My comment is really about a bit about strategy and process, perhaps. And if I'm getting, the cart before the horse, just stop me. But I sent you a piece about question storming and new opportunities for urban redesign. I am assuming you might not have had time to look at it, but the concept is that we have a tremendous opportunity. We had it before, in my opinion, but now the pandemic has accelerated this opportunity for us to think differently about how we live, how we work, where and how we live. My business at Personal Cities is all about working with cities. So I'm very focused on issues of sustainability, climate change, inclusion, et cetera. But the idea of question storming is one I wanted to throw out. And I don't know what your plans are for these breakout groups, but I think it would be really cool if we could work together in smaller groups and maybe dissect the big questions, the difficult questions that, the ones that reveal our biases, the ones that reveal the fears that we have about changing the way we've always done it. So just one quick example, which is if we wanted to ask the difficult questions about city design, livability, sustainability, climate, does the growth of a city require more buildings, more congestion, more traffic? What is the optimal city design to reduce CO2 emissions? In other words, you just keep asking these questions. You don't have answers because I'm not sure we know answers, but the process sort of illuminates a new path. And I just wanted to bring it up to you because I feel like you're leading a charge of so much collective intelligence. So thank you.
Thank you. I was going to ask you what question storming is, and I think we've got a sense of it now. We are about to go into breakout groups. What was provoked in you in that conversation?
So George, you are unmuted. George Okray?
Yeah.
He's on deck also.
Thank you. I put something in chat. Look, for the last couple of weeks, I've been publishing a lot of stuff on mutual aid, trying to link people together. Not only is this happening on the level of material with face masks being produced and face shields being produced and open source technology for ventilators and all that stuff, but it's also happening on a level of intellectual activity. Right. MIT is having a hackathon on COVID-19 this weekend. Folded is doing stuff on COVID-19 as well. And that we haven't talked about that at all in this discussion is pissing me off.
Okay, thank you. Somebody else. What did the breakout conversation provoke in you?
Mitra?
Sorry, I've got to unmute.
You're unmuted.
Okay. What provokes me comes out of that graph you showed right at the beginning, Gil. It's that, on the exponential, everything behind you is flat, everything in front of you is vertical. But even when you see that, you don't realize the potential for change. That at the moment, there are many, many little initiatives that can make a huge difference in the outcome. We almost saw a UBI here in Australia this week, right? We saw a flat rate amount of money given to everybody who lost income. That's essentially a UBI, except it doesn't go to everybody yet. The opportunities to push those things through at the moment are stunning if we're capable of surfing chaos. If we sit around and plan everything, we're never going to achieve anything.
Surfing chaos and focusing on leverage points to move the system, as you just said. So for people who don't know Donella Meadows, 12 places to intervene in a system. This is a great time to reread that. Jean, who's next? And the rest of you, please feel free to comment in the chat.
Chauncey Bell.
What are the
unmuted.
Bill, thank you for convening this. What I'm struck by is this is a fertile group of 100, let's say it's 100, whatever, 100 people with urgent ideas, desperately asking to be listened to, without a good interpretation about listening and without a good interpretation about how anything new really is going to be developed. And that is an invitation for arguments. No, you're wrong. No, you're wrong. No, you missed the point. No, we're missing this, et cetera, et cetera. And I recommend attention on two questions. What the heck is going on in the phenomenon that we call listening? And what diagnosis do we have about what really needs to be addressed here? What's the mess? So that's it.
And how well would you say we've done on that in this last hour and 15 minutes?
We've surfaced it.
Thank you.
Revealed it.
Let's take one more. And then
Margot Covington, you're unmuted.
Thank you.
And the rest of you, feel free to comment in the chat. Margot, what was provoked in you in the breakout conversation?
Noticing kindness and self-empowerment.
Thank you. Let's take one more.
Ken Homer, you're unmuted. Ken Homer.
Thank you, Jeannie. I'm here. Thank you, Chauncey. I was going to talk about listening, so thank you so much for surfacing that. I think it's incredibly important. The other thing is, who is the we? I keep hearing this we, and I don't think we have a good sense of the we that we're talking about. There is we in my neighborhood who are banding together and taking care of each other and buying groceries and checking in with each other. There's we who are on this call. There's we who are outraged. There's we who are thinking the world is getting better. There's we who are thinking it's worse. How do we organize those different we's into a coherent force for the change we want to see in the world? Because like the future, it's happening all around us. There's good stuff and bad, and where we put our attention is what we're going to be drawn to, what we reinforce. So, and it's imperative we both focus on what is possible, what's good, while also being aware of the things that might undermine that. So it's not all about the love and light. It's about what do we do about the growing shadow as well. Thank you.
Thank you.
Harvey Stone.
Yeah, as I've been listening, I'm remembering about 3 years ago, I think it was, I went to the big environmental demonstration, climate change demonstration in Washington, a couple 100,000 people. And I came out of it so discouraged because I watched people, listen to people. It was about save the bees, save the trees, save the whales, on and on and on. So fractured and so splintered as an environmental movement. And what I feel now, let me just finish, please. What I feel now is there are so many things we could get involved in, but if we don't politically get involved and stop this guy and the others around him 7 months from now, the rest of these conversations, I don't believe are going to be, I don't want to say relevant, but we're going to have a hell of a lot harder time.
You want someone else?
Nicole Lozaro. What was provoked in you by that breakout?
Yeah, so I've been thinking about this, challenge for this is my 4th week, I guess, of going into isolation. And the thing for me is I have many initiatives. I'm a game developer. I have a game called Tilt World. We plant trees in Madagascar. And the funding I'm just feeling this resistance. Like I can't do it because I don't have the finances to do it. I have to keep my consulting business going. I got to pay the rent on the studio. And so there was definitely a sense of frustration on the practical side of, how do we, and I'm probably not alone in that we're, balancing, expenses at the same time of wanting to do good. And I have specific things that I can do. Mobile gaming is a great spot right now. VR gaming is a great spot. A lot of people are doing it. So it's a great way to get content out there. But there's that financing step, which is a challenge. That's all I wanted to say.
Thank you. It's present for all of us. We all have the challenge here. And we started out talking at grand scale about reinventing the world. We're reinventing our lives and reinventing our businesses and our work and our means of sustenance. And who the we is that we're involved in. Ken, to your point, we are each of us involved in many different we constellations. You know, I'm not me. I'm me with you. I'm me with my synagogue. And I'm me with my family. And I'm me with my political formations. And all of those feed the sense of who's here. So one of the things that strikes me that's just critically important now is more conversations like these and like others. And it's a chance for us to not just reach out to a lot of people, but to listen to a lot of people and listen to people who are not like us, or who don't necessarily agree with us. There's a tendency among people, whether on the right or the left or the top or the bottom, who consider themselves wise and enlightened, to see education as a process of telling other people what we know. There's an opportunity here to listen to people who we've never listened to before. And to listen not just for the words they say and the positions that they articulate, but to listen to what they care about. What are the things that concern them? What are the things that are motivating them? My partner, Bill Reed, has done community processes where we're, to oversimplify, by doing that, by doing a profound listening to what people really care about, has brought together communities that were at war with each other. That were in political battle, that were lawyering up to fight each other over a development project or a school or whatever, but found, with some careful listening and peeling of the layers, found that they cared about the same things. And then there opened up an opportunity to design something new that they could support across their differences and across their disagreements. So in the final moments here, I want to invite you to do a few things. One is to listen to each other, to people you don't normally listen to, and listen to yourself. Observe your own inner conversation and the conversation you have with other people, as though you were a third party watching it, and say, is what I'm saying true? Or is it a story? Is it a story that, where does it come from? Is it grounded? Do I believe what I'm saying? Is what I'm saying powerful for me? Does it give me agency and capability in this moment, or does it divert me? Be your own diagnostician of your own conversations critically. Be very open in the conversations you have with other people and listen. I would invite you also to read broadly. If you're watching the news, watch the other channel. And if you're reading the newspaper, read the other newspaper. And here's the hard part, not as a chance to say, those idiots, they don't get it, but to listen for what they're listening to. And whether you want to do this as an exercise in political strategy or an exercise in human compassion, that's up to you. But I invite you to try on that exercise. For our next session, which we will have, I also want to offer you a couple of reading suggestions that you may find provocative and stimulating. Let me see if I can share the screen here again. And these are three books that I have found enormously provocative and I think make an important contribution to the conversation that we're beginning here today. Bruno Latour is a French political philosopher. He's written a book about climate that is one of the most powerful I've seen, talking not so much about science, but about solidarity. And solidarity, a word you don't hear often in this country. Solidarity not just among people, but across all life forms. What he calls Terrans, inhabitants of the planet Terra, who share a common destiny. It's a profound and provocative book. Speaking of solidarity, disclosing new worlds, entrepreneurship, democratic action, which we're all talking about, and the cultivation of solidarity. I've been studying with Fernando Flores, one of the authors for the past 3 or 4 years. It's a challenging read, but it will shape the world. And The Overstory, a novel. Some of you may have read, it's a Pulitzer Prize winner. about the life of this world seen through the eyes of the trees and the humans that interact with them. Another Rock Your World book. Have a look at those. We're going to continue these calls. So if you, I don't know how many of you heard about this from my mailing list or other means, but your safest bet to be notified is to join my mailing list at natlogic.com. You see that here. Let me bring on one more poll for us. I'd like to know from you, poll 2, how frequently would you like to have these calls? And what scale of conversation would you prefer? Large groups like this, smaller, more focused groups on particular topics, intensive reading groups? And while you're voting on that, let me just ask you, last time we were an hour long, this time we were an hour and a half. Just unmute yourself briefly or put in the chat how long you'd like these calls to be.
Mike, close your share screen.
Yeah, Gil, we haven't got the poll yet.
Here, okay. Well, I'll have to launch it. Too many buttons. There you go.
There you go.
Okay. So while you're responding to the poll, comments in the chat about how long you'd like a call to be.
I'd vote for an hour.
Gil, could I suggest a concertina approach to the size? I think you need to have a big group like this, and then you need to follow it up with smaller groups on specific topics. Then you need to open it out again, and you need to bring it back. Otherwise, you know, that you're never going to get the right level of fractalization and the scaling of the connections.
Like I said, this is an experiment. We want to learn together with you how we shape something together that works. So appreciate that, and comments offline as well. I also want to say that in addition to these calls that we'll do in small and large groups, I'm available individually to speak with you about how I can support you in your lives and in your work and your business, whether that's informal conversations, coaching relationship, consulting to your organization. We all have a lot of work to do. And we need to find ways to support each other in doing that. We're also assembling tools and resources. My partner, Daniel Aronson, who's on the call here somewhere, is building a toolbox called Reset 20, what comes after COVID-19. These are business-focused tools that try and take the things that we've done in our work with large corporations and distill them down into simple, accessible form to help accelerate the outflow of that. So if you're interested in that, please indicate that in the chat or send me an email, and I'll put you in touch with that process.
Okay, I'm going to end the poll. Everyone has voted. Okay, and I'm going to share the results.
Okay, very good. Okay, that's very helpful. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Yeah, and let me say one thing by way of closing. I want to share a story with you from my friend Tyrone Cashman, one of my oldest friends, a noted biophilosopher, working deeply with Terrence Deacon and Jeremy Sherman at University of California, Berkeley. We've worked together, met him at the New Alchemy Institute back in the long ago, and we've worked together in Jerry Brown's office in the first term back in the 1970s and 80s. And Ty wrote a remarkable piece. I've not been able to find the original language, but it sits with me to this day. He said, there comes a time when the stage is bare. There's no script, there's no actors on the stage, there's no story that everybody is sharing. And in that moment when the stage is bare, there's an unprecedented opportunity for a new story to arise, for someone to walk those boards and speak different lines, for someone to tell a different story in the emptiness of what there is now. Milton Friedman, who I have never agreed with in my life except now, said back in the 1970s that in a moment of crisis and chaos and disarray like this, there's an unprecedented opportunity for ideas that have been lying around for a long time to suddenly find fertile soil and take root. We, in all the work that we've been doing, have been assembling these ideas, nurturing these ideas, planting them, harvesting, pruning them for decades. And there's an opportunity now, fertile soil, bare stage, to start to tell a different story. So we are all doing that in our various ways. I think most of us on this call have had our lives be about that. And the question I want to leave you with is what becomes possible if some mighty few of us hard focus on that question? While the world is in disarray and dealing with first aid and immediate response to COVID and protection of lives and communities and economies, there are also people thinking about what's next. I guarantee you it's not only us and it's not only people who agree with us, but people all across the political and societal landscape thinking those thoughts and moving on that. And that's the question that I'm living with every day. And I invite you to live with every day and for us to explore together. Thank you so much for being here today and for taking the time to think deeply together. We'll be in touch with you by email about scheduling the next call. Again, if you're not on our mailing list, please get on it at natlogic.com. I will announce as well through Facebook and LinkedIn, but the mailing list seems to be the most effective way of getting people's attention. So thank you so much. Go in peace, be safe. See you next time.
Peace out.